Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Ankit, and I'm one of the founders and the CTO here at Postman. And I'm really excited to be here and get an opportunity to speak with all of you. And I hope it's a great day full of learning for everyone. So, Postman, as many of you would know and hopefully use, is an API development platform that is used by more than 15 million developers in more than 500,000 organizations all around the world. And we consider ourselves incredibly lucky to get the opportunity to regularly connect with that incredible community. And I'm so happy to see all of you here, excited about APIs and the future that they and you all will usher. So today I will talk about three things broadly. We will start by talking about APIs, why they're important, how has the thought process around APIs itself evolved over the last decade, and what it means for all of you. Next, I will walk all of you through the story of Postman, how it started, how we got here. And finally, we will conclude with my thoughts about the future of software development. All right, so let's get started with a little bit more about me and about Postman. So I've been associated with Postman since the very beginning. The first version of Postman was written by my co-founder and our CEO, Abhinav, and I started contributing to one of the earliest versions of the product. I'm, of course, extremely passionate about APIs and the role that they play in the modern global economy. And our story is closely tied to the evolution of APIs and how they have taken center stage in modern software. Postman, as I mentioned, is used by more than 15 million users in more than 500,000 organizations in almost every single country in the world. It also continues to be one of the largest active developer communities. So let's take a few examples of APIs. You're on Twitter, you type out, let's say 140 to 280 characters on your phone and tweet it out. You're basically calling Twitter's API, which does the heavy lifting behind the scenes and pushes your tweet to all of your followers. You're on Spotify. You see a recommended list of songs for you that's powered by Spotify's APIs. You ask your Alexa device to turn your lights on. That's basically Alexa systems calling your Philips bulbs APIs. APIs are all around you, even if you don't necessarily know what they are. Mark Andreessen, the creator of Netscape, which was the first web browser, once famously said that software is eating the world. And in the modern world, APIs fuel that software that's eating the world. APIs allow for increasingly complex software that is being built around you to become interfaceable. It is the language with which you can talk to all of that software. In 2019, Akamai published a report that said APIs make up about 83% of all web traffic now, which is actually astoundingly up from about 47% in 2014. And as you can imagine, this number is growing rapidly. And anyone and all of you entering the workforce at this stage should consider APIs as a core skill, as you will regularly be consuming APIs, creating APIs, interfacing APIs, and using APIs to make decisions as you move along in your career. APIs are indeed the building blocks for all modern software. And the thinking around APIs itself has evolved considerably. So when I started my career as a developer, APIs were considered to be just wrappers around code. You'd write code and slap an API on top of it. And for a large percentage of people in the software ecosystem, that is unfortunately still the case, though it is rapidly changing. APIs are no longer, and increasingly no longer so, considered to be just a tool for developers or wrappers around code. Modern companies now consider APIs as products, much like your websites or mobile apps that are designed keeping in mind who their consumers are and what their needs are. And this phenomenon is more and more commonly known as API as a product, or as the acronym goes, AAAP, which is a play on software as a service. More and more businesses are now being created around these APIs. And if you look at companies like Stripe or Twilio, the product that they sell and the business model itself is centered around the API. And both of these are examples of massive companies where the core product is an API. Let's go into deeper into Stripe, for example. So at its core, Stripe is a payment gateway. So if you want to start a business that serves customers all around the globe, and I want to charge my customers for it, I just need to hook into Stripe's API, and most of my billing needs are taken care of. concerns around how to manage credit card transactions, fraud, returns, taxation, regulations that vary across countries and geographies. And all of this is done by just consuming Stripe's awesome API. Of course, as you can imagine, decisions like these, like using Stripe's API, are not typically taken by a developer who may be implementing the implementation or the integration. This decision is typically taken by a CEO or a CFO or a VP, depending on the size of the business. So you see leadership and business teams now know and consume APIs because APIs allow them to focus on their business's core competence and the value generation for their customers, while it allows them to structurally and programmatically outsource the rest. And APIs help create these networks of technical people and business relationships. It's fascinating. We even see like governments now actively invested in this. There are more and more legal and public policy definitions that are being strengthened around APIs. Typically, you see APIs are of three types. Public APIs, which are publicly available for anybody in the world to consume. They're usually fronted by some kind of an auth. Partner APIs are APIs that are exposed by companies to their strategic business partners. They're not necessarily available to everyone and need a specific form of entitlement to access them. And like public APIs, partner APIs are fundamentally from the tip of this iceberg because they are the most visible ones and the ones that are used to communicate beyond the organizational boundaries. Private APIs, on the other hand, are hidden behind the organization and only exposed to internal systems. These private or internal APIs are used by teams within organizations to share capability and generate and gain agility in the process. Private APIs also form the majority of the iceberg across most organizations. And given the external visibility of these public APIs or these partner APIs, you will see a almost disproportionate amount of effort that organizations put in to make these APIs consumable. The interfaces of these private APIs or the internal APIs, on the other hand, tend to be more dynamic, and organizations often need to be aware of the fact that these things will constantly change and the cost associated with it. Internal APIs end up having these internal consumers whose jobs rely on the effectiveness and the stability of all of these APIs. This API revolution or transformation is powered by several trends that we see within the ecosystem. You see public cloud offerings from companies like AWS, Microsoft, Google, and others, which means that more and more businesses are now moving away from the legacy self-managed infrastructures over to the cloud and creating APIs on top of it. You see systems now getting increasingly decomposed. Microservices architectures themselves abound, while things like serverless technologies have themselves found a ton of interesting use cases. And very importantly, a large number of SaaS companies are providing more and more value so that companies can continue to focus on their core competencies. And the examples, of course, like I mentioned, Stripe, Twilio, and so on. And any modern organization of a decent scale now uses hundreds, if not thousands, of SaaS vendors as a part of their regular act of doing business. And in this modern world, the fixed cost of starting a new business has drastically reduced because of these trends and because of the power of APIs. Business owners can now focus on generating value to the consumers that they have while programmatically and structurally outsourcing through the power of APIs. APIs fundamentally allow different forms of collaboration. The APIs allow people within teams to work with each other. APIs allows teams within an organization to work with each other. And APIs allow organizations to work with each other centered around different APIs. And the problems, and this is how the API ecosystem itself has evolved, that the problems that originate in the API ecosystem are not just technology problems, they are problems of collaboration across organizations, across the different dimensions that I just spoke about. And as a result, you see a whole new spectrum of jobs that are now being created in the world. You see dedicated API product managers, people who design APIs, API marketers, people who sell APIs, and so on and so forth. in this fundamental collaborative world that is being built around the notion of APIs. And over the years, we ourselves evolved Postman from its origins as a REST client to become an API first development platform that is centered around collaboration. Or, in other words, a collaborative platform for modern software where development begins with an API. And this platform that we built out is being used massively now with hundreds of thousands of teams that currently collaborate on top of Postman, creating tens of millions of APIs. So moving on to our second topic for the day, right? Where did all this begin? How did we get to this point? So let's go back to the start of my career. So I started my career at Yahoo as a developer about 10 years ago in Bangalore in India. And this is where I met my co-founder and our CEO, Abhinav. So as a part of our job, we were working on a front-end application where we were talking to a bunch of APIs. And this was our first formal introduction to APIs. I mean, I'd always read it in textbooks, but this was like the first time we were utilizing it in to generate production code. And we had to constantly figure out, as a part of our job, what the API was, whether it was up to date, whether it was working, not working. We didn't necessarily have any documentation to go with it as the APIs themselves were changing every day. And it meant that we often had to run to our manager's desk and figure out things for ourselves. And anybody here who has actually developed production level systems would probably know this pain. And this wasted a lot of time for everybody. And at times, we ended up breaking the system, which made people not super happy about us lowly folks in the team. And everybody around us was using this command line tool called curl for debugging. API documentation itself was, these curl commands that were shared in text files over Yahoo Messenger, which is chat client we used to use at Yahoo. And curl itself was hard to use. First time we just did this man curl, this sort of interface popped up, and this scared us quite a bit. So this whole sort of experience bothered us quite a bit. In spite of the fact that we were relatively earlier in our careers back then, we could see that APIs were important because we were seeing people generating a lot of value by consuming these APIs around them. And for something as critical as APIs, we were using tools that were definitely not designed for this workflow, and in general were pretty hard to use or non-existent. And the workflows themselves seemed pretty choppy, ad hoc, and sort of just like thrown together. And the only way we saw this working, and the way that it did work, was that if everybody sat next to everybody else that they worked with, and one vacation or one sick day from anybody in the team meant that we, as somebody who were consuming these APIs, were often stuck in terms of what we could do. And we wondered why there wasn't a simple interface to help with this. Why do we have to rely on a command line interface that is, of course, complex to use and also built decades ago? And this was an experience that first, started at Yahoo for us, continued across the companies that we worked with of different sizes, and something that sort of like stuck with us as a problem statement that existed. So to scratch this itch, we did what every lazy developer does and built a side project. And that is how the first version of Postman came about in 2012. This is a screenshot actually from one of the earliest versions of Postman. And our users remember this as a time when Postman was blue. So we built the software, we gave it to people around us, and we saw their experience noticeably improve. And we saw that building, and using these APIs became easier. And as we were encouraged by this, we put it up on the Chrome web store, and it really took off. We saw developers recommending it on places like Stack Overflow, presenting it in conferences. This was a screenshot from the Stack Overflow answer in March of 2012, which is actually the first public appearance of Postman anywhere. And I remember back then, like Avinav, who had posted this, was a lot more excited about his Stack Overflow ranking going up because of this answer than about Postman itself. And the community around this itself was growing quite rapidly. We were learning so much about HTTP, about REST, about APIs from the community questions and the feature requests that we got around it. And very quickly, we grew to about 500,000 users all across the globe. I took this screenshot when we first added Google Analytics to Postman in 2013 and let it run for a couple of months. And it was quite exciting to see, it just slowly but definitely like turning like all blue. And it was exciting and honestly also surprising to see how much resonance people got with the product that we were building. The community, as I mentioned, itself was growing. There are tons of feature requests, ideas for improvements. Postman, of course, a free product and back then. And what we found out was it was actually making an impact in large development teams too. And something actually super interesting happened around that time. So we had one of these large teams from somewhere in the US, which actually sent across this $500 check to us in Bangalore, in India. And that check itself was accompanied with this sort of like a guilty message, which went something on the lines of, we use and pay for tons of software. However, nothing makes us as productive as this application Postman. And we know it's not much, but we don't want the development to stop. So please consider this as a token of our appreciation and for what you guys are doing. And this honestly was a great boost for us because it showed that developer teams value their productivity and the time of their developers. And that validation is what took us forward to the next stages of our growth. Around that time, we were working on developing something called as Jetpacks. Now, Jetpacks, some of you guys may now know those features which are now embedded into the product around executing your collections and writing, workflows around gluing together different requests. So at that point in time, Jetpacks was a very unique addition to the software ecosystem when it came out. Nothing like that existed, and it actually solved a very important part of the development workflow. So to assert on our growing theory around organizations valuing developer productivity and sort of dip our toes into the monetization pool, we made Jetpacks a one-time in-app purchase for about $10 and started distributing it. And people wanted to buy a lot of Jetpacks. And some of the purchase patterns themselves itself were super interesting. In fact, not just the fact that people wanted to buy a lot of Jetpacks, but they also wanted to buy Jetpacks in a bunch or as teams. And there was a lot to learn from this experience because we kind of were observing, something that we had built out, which we were selling as independent licenses, but people wanted to buy multiple licenses, and we really wanted to observe, whether the entire team was buying it or was it just part of the team that was buying it? Was it the development team? Was it the testing team? What exactly were they doing? What is it that we wanted to do as a part of the application and the Jetpacks that they just purchased? What was their workflow? And we were, of course, not a real company yet. Around this time, I also had left my job and decided to work on Postman full time. And we are pretty much set on, bootstrapping with the revenues that we were generating from Jetpacks. We kind of moved into like this 2-bedroom apartment. This was my first week at Postman using a bookshelf as a desk. And at this point in time, we decided to solve, the problem which we had first faced at Yahoo and also at every subsequent job that we had taken up, which was the problem of collaboration around APIs. APIs, as I mentioned, are inherently collaborative. APIs allow people to collaborate with other people, systems to collaborate with other systems, organizations to collaborate with other organizations. And yet the tools that enabled APIs to be developed were not necessarily designed for collaboration, and we designed to change that. But we didn't want to just roll this out without getting a clarity on some of the open questions that I discussed earlier and the ones that I mentioned here. So we wanted to really get a sense of what people want to do, how the collaboration itself would work out, and we quickly, actually, in fact, over a period of 3 months, built out this thing that we were then calling the Postman Team Library, and ran it in beta. And ran it in a private beta in the beginning. Then we ran it as a public beta, and we ran the beta for a while. I think somewhere around 2, maybe 3 quarters. And we also, actually just took maybe a quarter to build out this minimum viable product because we wanted to put this in front of our real users as quickly as possible to get real feedback. And this thing like really took off. In fact, as Jetpacks itself, people were buying, we were seeing a lot of interesting purchase and behavioral patterns. But one piece of consistent feedback that we used to get was around our logo. So if you see the old logo that we have here, which is on the left, is this royalty-free image that we were using, and this new logo that we have on the right. And we wanted to create this new logo to represent the space of the modern developer tools. We wanted to a new idea for Postman, this space age version of Postman that is going between planets rather than door to door. That is, not a mailman, for example. And we sort of redesigned our website at this point in time to match the new logo, and for the first time put an address on our website itself. And so in about 7 years ago, in October of 2014, we started out as a business. And of course, it's been a fascinating journey since then, one full of immense learnings. And of course, a lot has happened along the way. A lot of learnings have also been retrospective. Most of the decisions that we took at that point in time were definitely based on a few basic principles. The principles of first principles thinking, having a product-centric mindset that was centered around the why. I'll touch on that very soon. And making sure that we do right by our customers and our users, right by our partners and by our team. And while consciously and deliberately keeping in mind that the definition of what is right is always evolving. And as the problem statements that you have evolve, as constraints evolve, what is right itself changes. And finally, make sure that we do this in an organic, sustainable way, which forms the foundation of us creating a long-term company. And our goal always has and will continue to be to solve real problems that real people face and making them better at their job. And there have been a few factors that contributed to our growth till this point. The factors around need. The fact is that the product itself was basically built to satiate our own need, built by developers, for developers, and fundamentally discovered by passionate, like-minded people. And Postman in its early days grew very organically through word of mouth till it became ubiquitous enough that now there is an instant recall with the name when you mention the word API. Growth based on the center of the fact that we had the product thinking in mind. And we always come down to the simple point that, that simplicity in your product is a feature, even and especially when you are impacting and solving for increasingly complex use cases. Postman was one of the first applications that was built keeping in mind the idea of a great user experience for a dev tool. And we have always modeled Postman around this idea or this framework called Jobs to be Done, which was built by Professor Clayton Christensen, which recommends focusing on building better users, not better products. A good example of that is building let's say a better photographer, not a better camera. And if you look at how the camera ecosystem itself has evolved over the last now maybe 10 to 15 years, you will see the realization. Nobody actually realized that the thought about it, the idea of solving for better cameras is actually going to come through machine learning and artificial intelligence, and not by adding more megapixels to your camera. But that's where we saw this whole industry going, and that's where the notion of building better users, not better products, comes in. And this fundamentally requires an understanding of who you are solving this problem for, why are they facing this problem itself. Postman itself also grew fundamentally because of the notion of virality that was built into the product through Postman collections. But keep in mind that the virality was an essential part because it fostered and enabled collaboration. And it was and continues to be a natural progression for the product. And as we, built out an open source Postman collection format, it quickly became the most popular API documentation format in the world. And a very important part was the community that was quickly building up around Postman. It was the advocacy that was being done by individuals who genuinely loved the product, and the advocacy that was being done by influencers who saw a lot of value in what we were building and shared it with their community. I think this tweet by Colin, who is a director of engineering at NASA, has probably been one of the highlights of my time at Postman. I think I remember this tweet came out somewhere around 2015, if I remember correctly, right? And if you see here, even the early adoption in conferences where we had a lot of folks talking about their APIs using Postman back then actually lent a lot of credibility to what we were building out. So yeah. So finally, moving on to the final section of this presentation, and as promised, I wanted to conclude my discussion with some of the thoughts that I've had about the trends that we are seeing in the software development ecosystem. So we see that applications are fundamentally getting smaller. Instead of traditional applications with large packages, now you see more and more of these smaller microservices, or even further decomposed technologies like serverless. And the way that these applications now work is that you take this larger pool of applications and convert them into these smaller, microservices or serverless applications talking to each other through APIs. And I foresee that there'll be thousands of APIs that could be used to build applications. APIs themselves could be built within your company, built by others, instead of a few built-in, large traditional applications. And you will fundamentally be taking multiple decisions around the capabilities that you are doing by understanding who your consumers are and what is it that you want to solve for them by building things yourself versus, and you'll constantly take this decision of build versus consume, the things that you build yourself versus the ones that you discover and consume or license. And with this, managing a growing landscape of APIs will become even more critical. As it goes with everything in going back to the rise of the human civilization itself, right? We see that multiplier effects kick in when the building blocks, underlying building blocks, start becoming more and more fundamental, right? And at this point in time, where we are, you see the number of internet users have increased and continue to increase rapidly. And you have technologies like APIs that enable this systematic, programmatic collaboration and for systems to be built on top of each other. And what we saw with the evolution of the cloud computing, which reduced the cost of infrastructure, it made it significantly easier to start businesses and to build products at a rapid pace. And this fundamentally creates this multiplier effect towards modern innovation and invention as we see more and more companies building more specialized technology. So as a business owner or as somebody who's just trying to do something, I could just consume capabilities built in by different people, and that provides that focus that I need to innovate and to invent. And as a result of this, with this multiplier effect now kicking in, we will see things being built at a much faster clip than ever before. Software itself, I believe, now has the potential to anticipate what your users want by analyzing what it knows about them and their preferences. And this now fundamentally opens up this avenue for us to design experiences that look at the users while simultaneously focusing on their jobs to be done in a more intuitive, more personalized way. So instead of looking at just the cohorts of users for whom you're solving problems for and designing solutions for, now we see more and more solutions that come for localized and unique use cases specific to users. In essence, making your software more intelligent, more intuitive, more proactive, which is fundamentally awesome because now you can curate these experiences for individual users. And as a result, now what you will also see is knowledge workers, becoming more and more capable to augment their own workflows, making themselves more productive. You will not necessarily need to be a developer in the classical sense to be able to build. You will be able to glue together the capabilities that are available to you to make yourself more effective at the jobs that you are doing. And this entire revolution that we see now happening around low code and no code world is the one which will probably play out in the consumption outside of the developer ecosystem or just the pure classical developer ecosystem. And this entire revolution will be powered by APIs because it gives the tools that we have all continued to build over the years in the hands of people who can easily consume it. And the way to do all of this eventually comes down to user experience. User experience is and will continue to become the most important thing, and that will create the differentiation between good and awesome. I think Postman, as I mentioned, was one of the first developer-focused applications that emphasized heavily on user experience, and that has paid off significantly for us. And as software development evolves, I believe that user experience will still be the number one thing that you do, and it is how you compete. And with things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, the ability to personalize to the level of the user and understanding their behavior, we can create experiences that delight users individually, and that is where I believe the competitive advantage will be for most organizations. And finally, I believe strongly that organizations are and will continue to evolve to support all of these transitions that we see in software development. We've already seen how organizations are remodeling themselves around their APIs. You see now smaller teams who are more enabled being the primary ways in which organizations are structuring themselves, and all of these teams talking to each other by the interfaces that they create, both human interfaces and programmatic interfaces taking the form of APIs. And as a result, you see, philosophies like the API first becoming more and more prominent, and gaining, and it allows organizations to gain significant leverage in the process. And we see APIs becoming increasingly a competitive advantage for organizations as they move forward and work on the impact that they are creating within the ecosystem. All right, that's it from me. Thank you so much. I think it's been an absolute pleasure interacting with all of you, and I hope today is and yesterday was a day that is full of learning, and you take a lot away from this particular summit. Right. So thanks for listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.